Nice way to start out our session today on how Dominicans sisters live out their call. And so this afternoon we have three guests with us. We have Sister Ana Gonzalez, Sister Ellen Coates, and Sister Pat Connick with us, who are going to share how they live out their call as Dominican Sisters of Peace. And so we're going to have them share a little bit with us. And I thought we could go from our finely professed sister to our temporary professed sister to our novice. And we could share. And then after each of you shares, then we can open up the floor for questions and answers. Is there any other business we need to take care of before we begin, Bea? Are we okay?
Okay. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Great. So, Pat Connick, would you take us away?
So I'm just so glad to be here and so glad to be sharing this retreat with all of you. We've been doing a lot of Zooming lately, but it's just one more thing kind of there are always new things to learn, and this is just one more thing to learn and to adjust to. And I think I'll just start off by saying, I think in life in general, but especially in religious life, we're always kind of learning and growing, and we learn so much from each other. And I've learned so much from my sisters, from the people that I'm in ministry with, and I really feel like it's a grace to be formed by all those people who are part of the various communities that I've been a part of. And I started off when I was a very young woman many years ago. I came to the community, and Margie and I were actually in formation together. And it's always a matter of just listening to God's call. And after a couple of years, then I felt called that I really needed to give myself more time. And so I did that, and it really was a challenge because I really wanted to be in religious life. I felt called, but God said, well, not yet. So, and Margie knows that story pretty well, right? Margie, we had a lot of really good times together in that initial formation, and it was all wonderful, but it wasn't the time to proceed for me. In a nutshell, I ended up going to graduate school, and then some years after that, I was responsible for my father's care for many years, and so it was quite a long time. But after about 15 years, I ended up returning to the community, and I had lots of experiences in between that kind of convinced me that that's where I really did need to be, but God assured me that none of what I thought had been a waste of time, because I was really set on trying to get something done. I'm a doer. And so, so God really, just says, it's okay, just slow down. I'm going to take care of everything. I'm going to use every part of your life that you're living for good, if you just let me. And so there were many things connected to that time. I was able to be, with my family in the way I needed to be. I was able to be, available in ways to the initial at that time we had associates, and I was an associate at one point, and there was a little bit of a, because I was part of the associates and part of the leadership of the associates, I was able to bring my experience from being in formation the first time to that. And so that's kind of been a theme for me, that whatever I've gone through before that didn't seem like it was part of the puzzle, is all somehow connected to the web of community and to the web of my own life. And so now I'll just say, I don't want to go too much. I have a lot of years, so finally professed, I guess we get more like the 8 minutes than the 5 minutes. But anyway, the long story short, my dad was able to see me re-enter at one point before I came back, and that was a real grace for him and for me. And I've been in teaching this whole time. I taught at our college in Ohio, and have kind of retooled myself as a high school teacher in these later years, last 12 years. Everything has a season. And so I came from Ohio to New York. That was a big change. But I think that's one of the things about our life, that we get opportunities to be able to go places and have the freedom to move when, wherever God calls, wherever the community calls too. There's this mutuality between the desire of my heart and the desire of the community's heart, and we have dialogue about that, and kind of together, make the journey together. And that's what gives us our strength. I think that's, I really believe that's a reflection of, wherever we live our communities, whether it's in our family or in religious life or in a community of single people, that we're reflecting the face of God, because God is community itself. And so as I make this journey, that's the one thing that I'm really kind of sure of, that I can't think of the name of the person who said it. You can help me with this, guys. Everything belongs. Richard Moore. Everything belongs. Everything's a part of the, a part of our story. And I've done many different things, even though I've been in education a long time. I've done everything from being in the classroom to helping out with renovations to doing, various aspects, especially being with people in the community. And for myself, my sort of the thing I feel most called to is to be with people who maybe don't have the advantage of maybe the most premier education when they were young, but they're very committed to development and to learning, and that can make a big difference in their lives. And I hope I'm doing that here at Dominican Academy as well. And I really can't tell you what a joy it is to walk with these young women and to see them. I teach sophomores chemistry and then juniors, and I'm getting to the end here. So, but I can watch them grow in those especially formative years. And actually for me, I really believe that some of these women will be future leaders in the church. I hope they will. I hope they will. They'll at least be leaders in the community. And I really think that will make a difference, the kind of foundation that they've had here at the school. And we have many high schools in our congregation, not just the one here in New York. So what's exciting is this is going on in Tennessee and Louisiana and in Ohio at the high school level, and in a couple different places at the college level and our learning centers. All of that is really, so I kind of represent that part of the ministries, I suppose. But all of that is really important for just helping people to find that joy of learning and being able to have that. It's such a gift. No one can ever take that gift of education away from you, and it's the way that we grow and develop as people. So that's enough for now. I kind of said a mouthful, but again, I'm just so glad to be here. And it's a little weird. I keep trying, in Zoom, you're not supposed to look at the people on the screen. You're supposed to look at the little dot in front of you, right? So you're not like looking up in the air or whatever, but it's a little strange, but anyway, I'm looking forward to your questions at the end. Okay. So again, thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you, Pat. That was perfect. And could you just say a little bit about where you are right now?
Oh, I'm sorry. You mean in the background here?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm in New York City, and but this is our science lab. I have my office set up down here for COVID, because we're each in a different room when we're doing remote, so that it can be cleaned properly and everything. And this is, you can kind of see the curve in the ceiling. It's a room built on a circle rather than on just like square walls. So it's really kind of fun. And but we do a lot of our exploration of nature in this room. So
great. Thank you, Pat. Appreciate it. Yeah. Anna.
I'm muted. I apologize. Hello, I'm Sister Ana Gonzalez, and I am delighted to be joining you and grateful for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. I guess I would like to start with, before I started discerning, I wish I would have known two things. The first one, as we just heard from Pat's story, is that God's time is divine time. I kept thinking of, by the time I'm 30, by the time I'm 25, and I had these crazy, unrealistic goals for me. And the same applied once I started discerning religious life. By the time I'm 35, I'm going to make final vows. I am 40 and I'm temporary profess. And I'm embracing the fact that God's time is divine. And uh, it's not contained by chronological restraint, right? It's the perfect time, and it's a wonderful time, and it's a gift, and it's holy. And who cares if it's not according to plan? It's God's time. So I wish I knew that first. And the second one, uh, that religious life is amazing. And I think I thought about religious life when I was in college, when I met the Dominican sisters in New Orleans. I attended Loyola University in New Orleans, go Wolfpack, and met our Dominican sisters there. And I thought about it, but I was too taken away by myths, stereotypes. It was insane how much I thought about these myths. And I thought I would be deprived and lonely pursuing religious life. Fast forward 20 years later, and I'm living my best life. And if I had known those two things when I was 20, would my story be different? Maybe. Um, but it wouldn't it wouldn't be so much of a fight, because sometimes I make things harder on myself than they really need to be, and I'm swimming upstream and I'm struggling, and it doesn't need to be that way. So if I had known those things earlier in my life, um, I think those would have been helpful things for me. So my journey in religious life really started from home, right? My parents, I'm a cradle Catholic, and faith is at the core of my upbringing. So a relationship with God has always been important. And then having the blessing of meeting the Dominican sisters in New Orleans. So I'm Mexican, and I was deprived of strong female role models, right? It's a macho culture, at least the culture that I was exposed to. So when I went to school in New Orleans and met the Dominican sisters there, all of a sudden, I was at awe by brilliant, passionate, powerful, dynamic women who were making a difference in the world. And they became my mentors. And I think for me, that's when the seed was planted. And the thought of perhaps following in the example of these dynamic, amazing women started to just swing around in my heart. I didn't pay much attention to it because as a young Latina, I was expected to get married and have many kids. That's what a woman was in my family. Um, and I was kind of enamored with the idea of getting married and having kids. However, as I had these unrealistic goals for my life, God took me on some fascinating paths where I became open to the fact that, you know what? There's more than unrealistic expectations set by society, by cultures, by myself. My life is divine. I'm loved by God. What else can there be so that I could live a life-giving, joyful life? And I think that began an invitation to start thinking of what are my priorities. At the time, work was my priority. So I began to reanalyze, am I making up words here? Sorry. To analyze and reinvent myself in a way where God became my priority. It wasn't work. It wasn't a salary. It wasn't status. And that's really what launched me into serious discerning and religious life. So with the support of the Dominican Sisters in New Orleans, and then introducing me to the vocation director with the Dominican Sisters of Peace, I began a long journey. It took me about, it was about 4 years of discernment before I seriously moved forward with the community into religious life. So now I am temporary professor, and I'm very fortunate to be ministering at one of our founded ministries, Albertus Magnus College. Currently, I am grateful to be living out my call as a Dominican sister in our ministry by, similarly to Pat, empowering with education. And also our ministry, rooted in our Catholic tradition, rooted in our Dominican spirituality, is promoting values that are now more than ever so important. We need our students, we need our youth to go out into the world with a strong ethical, moral, value-based foundation. Education, proficiency in a field, that's good. But when the tough decisions come around, making the right choice is going to make the whole difference. So I'm grateful to be part of this journey for our youth. I would say that one of the challenges that I have living out my call as a Dominican Sister of Peace is that sometimes I get angry and I get frustrated and I want to scream or think horrible thoughts that are not very peaceful. I have to remember that living out my call as a Dominican Sister of Peace means respecting the divine dignity of all creation. Even the most vile person, in my view, is loved by God. So that is a challenge for me, and that is hard. But I continue to ask for God's grace to embrace this call, a call that is so life-giving to me. And I hope to hold on to it for the rest of my life. So I will conclude here and look forward to any of your questions.
Thank you so much. I have one question for you. Could you tell the little story about how you met the Dominican Sisters Peace again?
So I originally met the sisters when I was a college freshman in 1997. So after I graduated Loyola and after I moved away back home to El Paso, Texas, I was 30, and both of my sisters were getting married. Being 30, in my mother's view, was not a good thing. By 30, she already had 2 daughters, right? And she was seriously worried for me. you know, oh my goodness, she's not married, she doesn't have any kids. What's gonna happen? My daughter had, and it's like, she valued me in those categories. It's not like, well, you know, am I a good citizen? Am I doing well in the community? Do I have a stable job? No, it's having kids and getting married. So according to my mom, I was a complete loser at that point. So we're going back to New Orleans because both of my sisters are getting married and they're younger than me. So this is the cherry on top in my mother's view, right? And I visit Sister Dorothy Dawes, who had been a good mentor to me. And like, she was my friend, right? And we were inviting her to the wedding and we were talking and in a point, and she just looks at me and tells me, you know, we've been having this friendship for quite some time. But when are you going to join us? Like, she just said it straight out. I don't know if it was because her health was failing. I don't know if it was like, what was it that made her throw this question out there in such a clear way? No beating around the bushes, just like, bam. And it really like shook me, right? And it's not like I was like, and no nervous laugh. I didn't, you know, I thought about it and I'm like, that's a good point. Let me think about it. All of a sudden, after that initial launch or that initial question or invitation from Sister Dorothy, I became aware of signs. Were they there all along? Perhaps, but I wasn't paying attention to them until now. I used to teach GED on Saturdays. All of a sudden, a room that was unlabeled became the St. Dominic room. Then I was in an immigration march, and there were thousands of people in El Paso, Texas, demanding rights for immigrants. A lot of people. But who happens to be marching right next to me? Sister Rin Reeks with her Dominican Sisters of Peace shirt. And I look over and I say, oh, Dominican Sisters of Peace. I know the sisters in New Orleans. Oh, we're the same group. We start talking. And, you know, we began engaged. Then I'm talking to someone about, you know, having a birthday and it's on August 4th and oh, it's the old feast day of St. Dominic. Well, that's great. Finally, it's my birthday and I'm walking into church with my mom late. And my mom tells me, look, mija, you're 30. I'm worried about you. Your life is not what it's supposed to be by this time. So I want you to pay attention to what God has for you. God has a message for you. So off we go, and the lector's not there. So the lady who organized the mass asked me to read. Cold reading, mind you. So I go up to read the first reading, and it's the Vanities of Vanities. Now in Spanish, the translation describes that, one, you're working for an illusion. Your boss really doesn't appreciate what you're doing. You need to stop what you're doing and work for God. That shook me. Huge. And then the gospel reading was a guy who had this farm and he worked so hard all his life and filled up his silo to the top and he said, okay, I could retire now. And then God says, you fool, tonight you die. So, I mean, a little drastic, but it shook me. And to me, that was my call. That was clear. All these things had bubbled up. And then finally, my mother warns me out of concern that I'm no longer a spring chicken. And here is God's message to me. Stop working for an illusion. Hold on to what's true and real. So that's how I revisited with the sisters in New Orleans and began seriously discerning religious life.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. We were talking this morning, Pat Duell was talking about being aware of how God speaks to us. And boy, God was working overtime with you, huh? Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't pay attention at first. Like, it's like,
Yeah, but
what? Huh? Yeah.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate it. And Anna is out on the back porch of our house. So it's good to see you. Now I'd like to invite Ellen Coates to share with us a little bit about how she lives out her call as a Dominican Sister of Peace.
Thanks, June. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Ellen Coates, and I'm actually a second year or apostolic novice. I just finished my year of the canonical novitiate at the Collaborative Dominican Novitiate. I was in, where was I? I was in St. Louis, and they've moved that program now to Chicago, but it was really great, and I'll probably come back to that in a couple of minutes. But, you know, it's remarkable to me how many similarities there are in my story and in Anna's and Pat's, because I also am a cradle Catholic, and Mass and prayer and giving to God were all really important to me and have been throughout my life. And in fact, my career in public health, in a lot of ways, was really sort of trying to, I suppose, live what I thought was my call at the time. And I would say that it was, in fact, a vocation. My first vocation, I guess, but it was also, I felt like I'd been so blessed, and it was a way to give back a bit, but it also was a vocation and a career that I absolutely loved. And it gave me opportunities to travel all over the world, and in some small ways, I hope, make a difference. And at one point, interestingly enough, quite a few years ago, when I was in a very, very remote part of the world in Papua New Guinea, for both professional reasons and for safety reasons, I was living with missionary Franciscans and working in a local clinic with them. And honestly, from the chapel window, which was this big wooden, like a big, huge wooden shutter that you just pushed out with a stick, and that was that. I could look out from this point way up in the mountains and see for hundreds and hundreds of miles, which growing up in New England was kind of a novel experience for me to begin with, and not see any sign of civilization. It really struck me at the time, wow, this really is God's creation. And during that time, and I was only there for a couple of months, but long story short, during that time, I did wonder a little bit if I might have a vocation to religious life. And I found out years later, as I was leaving for Papua New Guinea, where I'd been before I was returning, my mother wondered the same thing. And when I got back, she and a sister who had been the superior at the Catholic college where my mother went to school and had remained a very close friend of my mom's, the three of us went to dinner and a lecture, and I got a note from Sister Alice a couple weeks later that literally brought me to tears. And she said, you know, when you were talking about your time, I noticed a spark in you, and I wonder if you might have a vocation to lay ministry or to religious life. And I came across that letter when I was getting ready to actually start candidacy, and it was one of the things that I just couldn't give up. I still have that letter. But the answer at the time seemed to be no. And while there are times when I wonder, was I really hearing the right thing, given that in that setting, I felt like I probably was more aware of God than I ever had been in my life. When I look back, as Anna and Pat have both said, it really is God's timing. And I think that, in fact, I was meant to do all the things that I've done between then and now, and was in a really better place in my life to enter when a few years ago, in the midst of extraordinary upheaval and transition and chaos in my life, I found myself responding to God in new ways. To begin with, there was one of these Memorial Day celebrations on television, and a young woman from Australia sang Andrew Lloyd Webber's Pie Jesu, which I'd never heard before, and no question, it's an absolutely lovely piece of music, but it also brought me to tears, and I was sitting by myself in the kitchen wondering, why in the world am I crying? And when the joys of technology that can be an interruption. Over the next couple of days, I started thinking about becoming a sister, and I really thought, do not be ridiculous. You want to run away. And probably running away to the convent is really not what you most want to do. So, just get on with it, get on with life. Only this sense of being drawn in a whole new way to God and being drawn in a new way to think about religious life really just grew and grew. And, I could tell you a lot about that, but ultimately, I called not Sister Alice, because I knew I didn't want to be a teacher, and I didn't recognize at the time that she probably would have welcomed a phone call from me saying, well, even though I don't think I want to be an Ursuline, I think I want to be a sister. Can you help me? But I also knew a sister who'd been part of a Dominican retreat center, and one of the ones affiliated with the one that Sue runs. And I called her, and she was phenomenally welcoming. And interestingly enough, the Dominican Sisters of St. Catherine de' Ricci had only recently joined the Dominican Sisters of Peace, which in fact only recently had been created. And to me, the existence of peace may be part of why my vocation came when it did, because this community has been an extraordinary home for me. There is diversity in every single religious group I've encountered, and particularly having just finished the CDN, I've had the opportunity to really spend time with sisters in formation and novice directors from a whole host of congregations, and they're all wonderful. But I think each of us has a home in a particular one for some reasons. And the very first time I walked into a Dominican Sister of Peace Mother House, I felt at home in a way that I only had in my own family home in the past. And that's been a big deal, but even more important, there's a lot in my life that's not necessarily different. What is different is everything that community offers, and all of the ways that my relationship with God and with prayer and scripture and everything that goes along with our faith has grown and has been enhanced and formed by my being here and being in formation. And really, honestly, more than being in formation in formal ways, living in community, communal discernment, and the opportunity to learn not just about faith, but so many other things from this extraordinarily diverse community of women has only brought me closer to God, closer to an understanding of who God is and what God means in my life. And that really is the center of why I'm here. Because what I've wanted all along is not just to have God in my life, but to really have God be the driving force and the ultimate influence and the center of my life. And that has been given to me and continues to be given to me in extraordinary ways. So there's a lot more I could say, but I have a feeling I should probably stop there. I think I've gone over time.
No, Ellen, thank you so much. Could you, when I called each of these wonderful sisters to ask them if they'd be willing to speak, they were all like, yeah, anytime, which was great. But Ellen, when we were talking, you mentioned how much preaching had really touched your heart. And we in the Order of Preachers, that's something that we do. And I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about that preaching.
Sure. June knows that because she had the patience to walk with me before I actually entered. June knows that when I first learned that OP at the end of all these women's names meant Order of Preachers, I thought, oh no, this is absolutely not for me. The last thing I ever thought I would want to ever be involved in was preaching. And the truth is, and June in wonderful ways explained to me that preaching does not mean proselytizing. And that in fact, one of the great blessings of Dominican life is that we preach with our lives. And it's not just about standing up at a pulpit or standing out on a street corner and talking about God, which has its value and its importance, but may not be my particular vocation or your particular vocation. Preaching really is how we bring God into the world and make people aware of God's love, and for me, God's mercy and compassion. And there are as many ways of doing that as there are people on the earth. But it is something, there's no question, the Dominican Sisters of Peace have been preaching those wonderful things to me in my life since the first time I walked into that retreat house. And I'm learning that in my life, when I am really connected to living my vocation and to being the person God created me to be and trying to follow Jesus and the Gospels and all that you've heard, all that language all along, but that in and of itself can be a preaching. It's a witness. It's a way of making that real in the world. And I hope that in my current ministry, which has nicely brought me back into public health, I'm doing COVID-19 contact tracing and other related things for Ohio State University. You know, I hope that when I talk to people, I don't necessarily talk about God, but I hope they get that same sense of love and of what God means for all of us to be for each other. To me, that's the preaching.